Welcome to Step Into the Pivot. We're your hosts. I'm Teresa Conti.
And I'm Ivana Polonio. We talk with people just like you. We have honest conversations about current issues that women and men face and how we pivot to address them in our lives.
This podcast is your companion as you step into a workout or take some time for yourself.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Step Into the Pivot. Ivana and I are so happy to have you here and to welcome today's guest, Nadine Youssef. So Nadine and I'm going to let Ivana talk a little more about Nadine, but Nadine and I connected because she is an attorney, actually an assistant chief counsel at the Walt Disney Company. And you guys can see all my Disney stuff and know I'm a big Disney gal. She's also now an adjunct professor at Loyola Law School. So we are so happy to have you here and to really be able to hear your story today. So I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you, Nadine, for being with us.
Thank you, my friend. It's great to be here. Thank you.
It's so wonderful to have you on the show, Nadine. This feels like a long time coming because every time we chat, I have this, desire to share your voice with a broader audience because everything you say, it feels like an inspirational, motivational, soundbite because it's so authentic. You don't have an agenda when you talk about yourself and your experiences. And that's how we met. We have friends in common. We have really beloved people in common, but we didn't know each other for many years until I realized that you were in our circle of friends, one of a pretty small handful of folks who decided to do something really practical, tangible, measurable for dear friends of ours in need whose stories we're not going to share today just because we don't have their permission. We didn't talk about that. But I want our listeners to know that the way I met you was by simply witnessing a humongous act of service that you did. And humongous and really, really tangible and practical, where other people were saying, "Oh, my hearts are with you." And I don't mean to belittle that, like words of support are important. You said to this family and the world, like, what can I actually do to help? What action can I take? And I got curious. I was like, I want to really get to know this person. Something's going on here that is a little different. And as we got to know each other better, I realized that we have a couple of different experiences in our backgrounds that are relatable, different countries. We come from different countries, but there are stories there that we share. So tell us about your experiences growing up, that country that you come from, and what was it like before you moved to the United States?
Well, let me just say first that spiritually, I feel very close to you too. I think we have a great deal in common in terms of our spirits and our souls. So I came from Lebanon. I was born in Beirut in 1972, just around the time that the Civil War was starting. And it was about 16 years Civil War. My first early memories, as you mentioned, were all about that, and were my memories of being a little girl in Lebanon and growing up in that environment. And it was a very sort of shaky start to life. I had a beautiful and supportive and loving immediate family and wonderful parents who I'm still lucky enough to have. Yeah, it was quite a mixed bag. It was, some days of going to school and being a perfectly normal kid, and other days where we were, we're living on the fifth floor of a apartment. Everybody in Beirut lives in flats, kind of like New York. And other days where we would be, traveling down the building to lower floors for safety during battles. And I remember very much hearing the sounds of war, the bullets. Some closer, some further, some of the bombs, some are closer, some are further. And of course, I could go on into story after story about, some of the physical experiences that I had at that time.
So tell us a little about your family's decision to immigrate. And, I'm sure there were challenges and I'm sure there were rewards. So I think we'd really love to hear about that decision and some of those experiences, good and bad, when you did immigrate to the US.
And so I think things got so bad in Beirut that, my father, who um, was overseeing the advertising business for Young and Rubicam all over the Middle East. Beirut used to be sort of the business hub of the Middle East, and had to move the business over to Athens, Greece, because you couldn't do it, and it became impossible. And before the age of 8, I had moved around about 5 different times. So every year or two of school, I was starting at a new school. And that was, making new friends, and it was challenging. It's a hard way to start. But my parents kept hoping things would get better, and they wouldn't. And so then the company my dad was with shut down their Middle East operations. And so then we started looking at what are the options. And the company offered him a position in London. And he had gone to graduate school in the States at Ohio State and always had a fondness for the US. And we had some friends here. And so we decided this would probably be the most long-term, stable place to be. And so I came here when I was 8 years old with my family. And it was hard because we left our entire family behind. And in my culture, we were very close to our extended family. So, but I had to leave, my grandparents, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, everybody. So, and eventually everybody kind of got blown across the map because, it became just impossible to live there on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, and here we are. I moved here when I was 8 years old with my parents and my sister. And I still remember it because I remember waking up in the morning, even at that age, and thinking, I will never have to hear that sound again. Those awful sounds and those awful experiences. So even
Except
then I
for
was
that,
aware.
yeah, except for that they stay in your head, right? Even when they're not happening on the outside. I mean, I've one of the experiences I have every 4th of July is that I get confused about
Yeah.
like, wait, what is this? And now it's easier because I've, trained myself that like it's 4th of July and just this,
Yep.
past 4th of July, one of the ways in which I trained myself to think about this, like these are not those sounds, is by looking at it. So I actually have to go make a thing out of it. Like, let's go
Mhm.
see the fireworks and let's go eat the hot dogs and salmon hot dogs and let's go do this to remind the psyche that like no, it's 2024 right now. We're no longer back in that situation because I'm obviously referring to the civil war in you know Croatia, former Yugoslavia, where what you talked about it with the going down into the basement. Oh my gosh, the complexities of the like, yeah, the same for us. We lived in a building where there was that experience of
Mhm.
going down to the lower levels.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, and sitting by the candlelight and wondering when it
Oh
was going
yeah.
to end, and feeling like it was never going to end, and feeling anxiety but not knowing what it was at the time, and wondering if everybody's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that gets deeply lodged into the body, and the confusion around the good stuff and the bad stuff, and the fascinating and the fearful. So, like the fact that there were these, really horrible blackout moments for us where we had to,
Yeah.
like you were saying, like be in the dark, but then cheat a little bit, meant that my family as a group, we watched all of James Bond movies, the whole thing from start to finish. Every single one. And it was gorgeous. It was such a beautiful, family bonding experience that was like built into this
Yeah.
horrendous situation, or that, kids were playing cards in those basements. There were some amazing card tournaments happening while we were also, terrified of what might be, going on outside. So I know you have a very poignant story like that you shared with me before offline about your dad and the rockets.
Well, so it's interesting, and I will say, even this last 4th of July, I left this party I was at 10 minutes before the fireworks started. I just didn't want to see it or hear it. I don't like the sound. I just don't. I never have. But yes, I mean, I remember, my dad is a very positive and happy-go-lucky person, always has been. And, it wasn't, unfortunately, it wasn't his first experience with war, because both my parents emigrated to Lebanon in 1948. And so they escaped a war at that time as well, too, and left everything behind. And that was difficult for them too. But so I remember as a child, my father trying to make a game out of it. And he would always tell my sister, well, if we just sit here right under the window, they won't be able to see us. It'll be fine. And, let's all sit here together and, just make it very positive as much as possible. And, but then at the same time, I remember him going up to the roof of the building we were at and, watching the rockets with his binoculars. And I never figured out why he would do that, but I used to sit there and worry about him and what was happening. And I remember in the foyer of our home, we had, one of those long tables against the wall, and they had little drawers in it. And for the longest time in there were like, he would collect the bullets that flew. And there was like a handful of them in there. For what reason, I don't know. Eventually they got thrown out, but they were there for a very long time. So it was just that constant feeling of anxiety. And as you and I always talked about, it's that feeling of like, what I tell people, it's like being in an earthquake that just doesn't end, where you're like, oh my gosh, it's getting worse. It's getting stronger. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it feels like that, only it could last for hours or days. So
Yeah.
it's a tough time.
Yeah. Wow. And just the way, I know I've talked with even a lot about this, just the way those stay with you, right? I think all of us have that, but those are just, I mean, shape your whole life, right? I mean, on an ongoing basis. So the other thing you shared with us is that in recent years, you had another major pivot in your life. You had breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I want to give that away, but we really want to have you back. We want to do a series in October for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So I think we're definitely gonna have you back to talk a lot more about that on kind of those special episodes. But can you just share with us just a brief taste of that and how it links to these other experiences? Because I think you really feel that those were linked in some way. So can you talk a little about that, Nadine?
Well, I remember someone telling me that, the experiences you have under the age of 5, they get incorporated into your nervous system like no other experiences in your life. And so it just becomes very, very automatic. And, I had one person, a doctor, described to me that my experience when I talk about what happened when I was a child was very similar to some of his veteran clients that had actually seen and experienced war, and what that felt like afterwards. And so I think like whenever there's a perceived danger in your life, you start to feel that same sense, and it's kind of an automatic trigger. And it's about being able to talk yourself out of it as much as possible. And so you were right. This year will be my 5-year anniversary of being cancer free. Yay! Which is a huge milestone, I think.
Actually, a very big yay. Yes,
yay.
A huge milestone.
Huge yay.
Thank you. It feels like it was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just always right there. But yeah, it's I remember when it happened, and I had a panic attack when the doctor told me and first gave me my test results. And she said to me, she was a lovely doctor, Dr. Chang, and she said to me, she goes, I didn't think it was going to go this way. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I remember hearing those words and just, that feeling. of your insides just caving in, you know? So yeah, but yeah, that was another major pivot and something else that, you know, you always perceive as danger, and it's something you have to consistently be aware of and consistently process, I think is the best way to put it. And to just recognize that's what's happening. I never really connected the dots, I think, until I was into my 40s, which I know is strange, but I never connected the dots that my younger experiences in life had anything to do with how I perceive things now, which probably sounds crazy, but you know, it just takes a
Not
few
at all.
people to point it out to you to connect it and to understand how that happens, you know?
Not at
So,
all. You have really good reasons. I really want to normalize that. You know, you have really, really good reasons why it takes a long time to connect the dots. And sometimes you see it on the surface, but you know, connecting the dots requires the willingness to start feeling some really uncomfortable things. And I
yes,
do find that like, you know, we develop a certain with chronological time, a certain maturity develops where you start to feel like now I can handle it. I can handle it in a way that even physically I wasn't able to handle when I was 5 or when I was 8. And now I'm here, like being
yeah,
in the ability to really feel the helplessness over my dad's up there with the rockets, right? My dad's out there he's driving around and it's like he's not supposed to be driving around. That's my
yeah.
like personal, you know, experience of what's he doing up there in his office when we're all supposed to be in the basement,
Mhm.
right? I'm totally helpless over that. It feels so intense. So connecting the dots, you got to go be able to feel the helplessness, and that's really hard. I'm really curious to just hear a couple more connections between as we start to close this out, the attributes that you feel, the skills maybe even that you've harnessed from those original experiences growing up that were perhaps helpful in dealing with the health pivot when you get the news. So you highlighted the panic attack, and I think I hear the skill in there. You're being vulnerable and sharing with us freely. That's what happened. There it is. Like you know that there's something really of benefit there to be honest.
I remember that day vividly, you know, right? The day that you're diagnosed, you just remember everything that
We
happened.
all do. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, I don't think that's unusual.
Yeah. It's
I,
like
I
sitting
remember
in the
mine too.
yeah, sitting in the waiting room and you know, seeing that you have your test results finally getting put in your chart and looking at it and saying, like, what does this mean? Carcinoma. What does that mean? And then, you know, getting called in and I'm there with my sister and she's just got this look on her face like, uh-oh, you know, and talking to the doctor after and everything about your you know, lumpectomy, which led to more invasive procedures. But I remember getting very scared and when we finally left the hospital, you know, my doctor was very much like, we're going to take care of this. And the thing she said to me was, I remember this, she said, Nadine, I promise you, this is not going to be the thing that kills you. And so I'm like, okay, she's the head of breast cancer division at UCLA. I don't have anything to worry about. She was my mother's doctor. We're just going to go with it. So of course, you know, you're still worried. And I also worried about, you know, telling my parents. And I remember I didn't want to be alone in my house that night. So came to my parents' house and sitting on the couch and sitting with my dad. And he had already been through prostate cancer. And so, you know, I'm just feeling anxious. And I remember him looking at me and saying this to me. He said, Nade, you know, everybody calls me Nade. That's close to me in my life, even though you know that. um, and he looked at me and he said, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to hunker down. You're going to take the most conservative approach possible. And you're going to pull through this and you're going to power through it. And you're going to do what you need to do. And then when you get to the other side, you're going to go and help other people who have the same situation. And that's all there is to it. And I think that was what I needed to hear. I needed to have a plan, an exit strategy. And that was my I'm just actually connecting the dot right now with talking to you guys. That's kind of what we did when we came here. We hunkered down, we pulled up our sleeves, we got to work, we rebuilt a life here. And I built my life here, and that's just what you do. I mean, right? That's how you get through things.
I love that. You brought tears to my eyes because, I love the part about, you're just going to hunker down, you're going to do it. And on the backside, you're going to help others. And I think that's so important. And when we kind of do the recording for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, I really do want to talk about that more because I think that is so, so, so much more important than any of us really realize, honestly.
And by the way, just to let you know, even though that's what connected me to what you were talking about at the very top, at the very beginning. It was right around the time that our mutual friend was facing challenges. And it was after that, my dad sent that to me, and I'm like, yeah, this is what it's all about.
Yeah. Two things I want to say as we're wrapping up with, you've just told us about how these pivots were a major step forward in your life. You have been transforming, how you see the world, how you show up in the world, and it's all like the next organic, logical step. I want to present two things. One is that everything we're talking about with the hunker down and power through, it doesn't really work if it's not backed up with the energy of softness and kindness and love. And what I'm hearing here that I really want to highlight for our listeners, our pivoters, is when your dad is sitting down with you and saying these words, and because we're sitting here with you and feeling you like channel that, he's loving on you, right? He's not telling you shape up, right? He could have said the exact same thing with a different energy. Your doctor could have said the same thing with a different energy. It's a completely different message. That's not what we're talking about, right, Teresa? You're shaking your head.
It's about the support, right? Like the way he said it, he was supporting her, and she knew that he was there for her. And I think that's exactly what you're trying to say. And I 100% agree with that.
And I love that. And this is so my big invitation for all of us who are so afraid to do something is we're so afraid that we're going to do the wrong thing or we're going to say the wrong thing. Like, it's the energy with which you say it, like, and put your foot in your mouth, like comfortably, but do it with love.
I think it's also that thing of working towards a higher purpose, something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And working towards that, it just makes it much easier than to just focus on yourself.
Yeah. So the second thing then I wanted to present is something that you had said in the past when we chatted, and I'd love for us to hear it again in your words. So I'm going to say it first, but using that example of what you did for our friend, using the example of what your dad did for you, what your doctor did when she is, motivating you to keep going. And Teresa, your examples, my own personal examples, it's like you really can make a difference. You really can make a difference. You made a difference to our friends. With that experience, right?
I mean, that's probably the kindest thing you could ever say to me. So, I mean, I'm flattered to think that I could have done anything like that and impacted other people. But I think that's what it's all about at the end of the day, for me anyway. That's what all this is all about, and why I wanted to start being an adjunct professor. And it's about paying it forward, because none of us are self-made. I mean, I put myself through college and law school, and I was the only one taking those tests, but at the end of the day, none of us are self-made. And I mean, as you can see, I have an extremely loving and supportive family, and wouldn't be here where I am without my friends and my family. So if you can be there for someone else, why wouldn't you do it?
Nadine, you just kind of said it all. You just wrapped it up very, very well, right? You're in agreement. I can see it on your face. So
this is why we do this.
This is why we do this. So honestly, I know we're out of time, but Nadine, I'm looking forward to having you back for us to talk about your other pivot.
I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you both.
I know you're a little nervous about coming on today, but it was amazing, and I think everybody really loves hearing the story. And I think the way you wrapped it up really is amazing. So thank you. My reminder to everybody is if you have a pivot, step into it. Ivana?
Yes, and my reminder is that like do what Nadine was doing here, open up about it. So let us know if you'd like to share your story and also connect with us on any of the topics that are coming up for you as you listen to these, beautiful shares. Thank you, Nadine, and thank you, Teresa, and thank you
Thank
all the
you.
listeners.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Step Into the Pivot. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights from our conversation. Remember, life is a series of pivots, and it's in those moments of change that we truly grow.
If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected, make sure to check out our websites. You'll find additional resources, behind-the-scenes content, and more details about our incredible guests. We love hearing from listeners, so reach out with your thoughts, questions, or your own pivot stories.
To keep the conversation going, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Instagram, where we share updates, quotes, and engage with our amazing community.
If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback makes a difference, and it helps us bring you meaningful conversations. We're signing off, reminding you that every pivot is a step forward. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Step Into the Pivot.